They do both sound a little bit like workarounds. I mean, surely this whole thing can't keep going like this. You know, you've got Visa and MasterCard and all these different systems that people are just so used to using. Will Bitcoin not just stay there and be there for those backwater channels and things that, you know, is there a longer term plan, do you think?
I mean, this is one of the exciting things about this space. No one knows for sure what Bitcoin might be in 10 years' time or 5 years' time. It's perfectly possible that Bitcoin will stay small for its lifetime if no one figures out how to scale it. I mean, today the Bitcoin transaction fees are already a few dollars, when a few years ago it used to be a couple of cents. So people are already being priced out of the network, and they've been having to use alternative cryptocurrencies like Litecoin or Ethereum or whatnot. So it depends on only time will tell how successful these scaling plans will be and how much centralization there will be involved. I mean, even if Bitcoin has a 1 megabyte block size forever, it's perfectly possible some other cryptocurrency won't have a block size, but it will just end up centralized or more centralized. So because of these debates, the Bitcoin network has had a bit of a standstill for the past few years. No one has, it has the features of the network and the protocol hasn't really moved that much because people disagree about how it should happen. Because if you wanted to do a protocol change on the Bitcoin network, you have to ask the miners, or the miners have to agree to it, because the miners are ultimately the people who are generating those blocks. So if you want the miners to just generate blocks according to certain rules, they have to be on board with that. And there's been a lot of debate and argument between miners and developers over what those consensus rules should be. And one of the prerequisites to having the Lightning Network launched in Bitcoin is fixing a bug that has existed since the start of Bitcoin called transaction malleability. And transaction malleability is a bug that basically means that because each transaction has a unique ID, it's possible to create another transaction with exactly the same data but with a different ID. And this kind of makes it difficult to build applications on top of blockchains, on top of the Bitcoin blockchain, because you can't be sure that if you're giving a transaction ID and the data for this transaction only has one ID. And this was a problem to establish the Lightning Network. So the developers proposed a fix for that called segregated witness. And what segregated witness does, it removes a piece of the transaction data outside of the transaction, specifically the signature data, outside of blockchain to what can be described as an extension block. And this has been a really controversial change because it essentially removes a very important piece of data for transactions outside of blockchain, and so miners don't really have to verify it anymore to generate blocks. And this is a very big change because every single wallet developer has to essentially update their wallet and insert a couple hundred lines of code to make this change happen, or to take advantage of this change. Where miners didn't like it, and they just wanted to increase the block size, whereas the developers didn't want to increase the block size. So there's a major standstill there because they wanted different things, but they kind of needed each other to make those things happen. So a group of companies, around 80 companies and around 90% of the mining power in Bitcoin, got together and said, well, let's make a compromise, and let's increase the block size, double the block size to 2 megabytes, and also include this new feature that fixes transaction malleability. And we'll have those both. So in theory, everyone would get what they want. But the developers weren't really on board with that. But the companies decided to go ahead with it anyway, and that fork is scheduled for around November the 18th. And people are currently fighting right now over what is the real Bitcoin. Is it the original fork or is it the upgraded version? Because those are essentially two versions of Bitcoin. Which one should actually be called Bitcoin? The original version or the one that's slightly upgraded?
Has this sort of thing happened before?
Not to this kind of extent. There's been a fork of Bitcoin before called Bitcoin Cash, which has forked off Bitcoin and increased the block size limit to 8 megabytes. And now it's currently the fourth or fifth biggest cryptocurrency. But the different thing about this fork is that these two versions of Bitcoin are both competing over the name Bitcoin, whereas the previous forks have diverged into their own name.
There are people out there who might hold Bitcoin in wallets now. What might happen after this fork for those people? Might they be able to upgrade their wallets after the fork, or how does it work in that respect?
So it depends on how you're storing your Bitcoin. If you're running a full node using the original Bitcoin software, then you will have to upgrade your software to a different piece of software created by the fork's developers. If you're using a web wallet like Coinbase or blockchain.info, most of these web wallet companies have actually signed up to the agreement to create this fork and to upgrade Bitcoin. Most likely, a lot of these companies have said that we will call Bitcoin this fork. This fork is what we consider to be the real Bitcoin. So if you're with one of those companies, then the upgraded version of Bitcoin will probably be the Bitcoin for them and for you. And if you disagree with that, you should probably take your money out of those websites and into your own wallet on your own computer so that you can have control over what you do with your own Bitcoins. Now, if you own a mobile wallet, your mobile wallet will follow what's called the longest chain, or the blockchain with the most accumulated work, which is basically the blockchain fork that has the most mining power. And at the moment, 90% of miners have committed to mining on the new fork or the upgraded fork of Bitcoin. So if it does happen that this new fork will have the majority of the mining power, then your mobile wallet will probably consider the fork with the most mining power to be the real Bitcoin. Because funnily enough, those mobile wallets don't have the 1 megabyte rule encoded in them. Only the full nodes on the computers do.
I could see this as being potentially something that could have catastrophic consequences to Bitcoin values. Is that something people have been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite, it creates a lot of uncertainty, and I do think it is problematic. But funnily enough, the value of Bitcoin has gone up $1,000 over the past week, and there's been some speculation that's because people think that if both of these forks can exist at the same time, then they will have currencies in essentially two different cryptocurrencies. Because that's essentially what happened with Bitcoin Cash. When Bitcoin Cash forked off from Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin Cash on the first day was something like $500. So people got $500 per coin for free out of thin air when this fork happened.